Welcome to the Deep Dive, brought to you by Reformed Thinking. In this show, we dig into stacks of sources, articles, reports, sometimes quite technical documents to map out complex topics for you. Today, we're tackling something pretty unique, a detailed strategy for rebuilding a nation's entire digital communication infrastructure.
And what's really striking about these sources we're looking at is that they're not just technical blueprints, not at all. They frame this whole massive undertaking, the governance structures, the legal framework, the actual network engineering as fundamentally a theological task. It's presented as work of public justice and loving your neighbor.
That's the key angle here. The plan is deliberately grounded in Reformed theological principles. They specifically mention the Westminster Confession of Faith, Chapter 5 on God's providence, and Chapter 23 on the civil magistrate. So the government's core job, according to this plan, is to create an environment where truth can actually be spoken and heard, and where things like corruption are structurally pushed back against.
Right. And the documents talk about aiming for what they call sober hope. It's a vision, yes, for restoring these channels for truthful communication. But it comes with this built-in, upfronted mission that, ultimate safety and stability. That doesn't come from having the best fiber optics or the most secure code. It comes from Christ.
They actually reference Colossians 1, verses 17 to 20 as the anchor for this,
Yeah.
reminding everyone that he is before all things and, well, in him all things hold together.
So what we want to do for you today is unpack how these deep theological beliefs get translated into very specific practical design choices.
We're going to trace that line step by step from moral law to governance, then to actual laws, and finally into the network architecture itself. And maybe surprisingly, this rebuild starts not with buying hardware, but with what they call a moral reset.
Yeah, the sources are incredibly clear on this. Step one isn't step one, it's step zero. The moral reset. Before a single shovel hits the ground, before any budget gets approved, the whole process has to start with a period of public confession and prayer. They explicitly model this on figures like Nehemiah or Daniel in Scripture.
That ordering is really interesting. Why is it so non-negotiable? Why couldn't they say, start fixing the immediate technical problems and deal with the ethical side later?
Well, within this reformed way of thinking, the absolute conviction is that providence governs outcomes. The sources argue pretty strongly that if you try to build a shiny new digital infrastructure on top of a morally rotten foundation, a foundation characterized by widespread deceit, officials looking out for themselves, national pride, that underlying decay will just seep into and corrode whatever new structure you build.
So you might get faster internet speeds, maybe, but you'd still have the same old problems. Rigged contracts, government propaganda.
Precisely. The rot remains. So they insist on dealing with the sin issue first.
And this isn't just a vague call for repentance, is it? The documents get quite specific about the kinds of sins that need acknowledging sins by both the rulers and the people that led to the breakdown in the first place.
They are very specific. They use the Ten Commandments as a framework, actually. So looking at the Eighth Commandment, you shall not steal the identified sin, is things like bribery in government contracts, cronyism, sheer waste of public funds.
Okay, that makes sense for the eighth. What about the Ninth Commandment, about bearing false witness?
There, the focus is on propaganda, official slander campaigns, the deliberate twisting of public facts by those in power, basically using communication to deceive rather than inform.
And you mentioned earlier this idea of idolatry, connecting back to the first commandment. What's the specific idol identified here?
It's what they call the idolatry that trusts technique as savior. It's the nation, including its leaders, confessing the sin of believing that pure technological power, more bandwidth, fancier algorithms, faster processors could somehow fix problems that are fundamentally moral or spiritual.
Like thinking tech itself is the answer.
Exactly. They quote Psalm 20, verse 7, about some trusting in chariots and horses, or, the modern equivalent might be silicon chips and fiber optic cables instead of trusting in the Lord. It's a warning against placing ultimate faith in human tools.
So once that national confession is made, the sources say there needs to be a concrete binding mechanism put in place, something called the Truth and Transparency Covenant. What does that actually do?
Think of it as a foundational piece of legislation. It's designed to frame everything that comes after it, all the laws, regulations, procurement rules. Its main job is twofold. Guarantee truthful public communication, meaning government statements have to be fact-based, verifiable, and establish open, auditable ways of handling contracts. It's essentially a public promise about honesty.
And I noticed this isn't just a one-off promise at the start. There seems to be a mechanism for ongoing accountability built in.
That's right. It's not confess once and move on. To keep things honest, The sources mandate a specific rhythm, a cadence, for checking integrity. The government has to put out quarterly public reports. And these aren't just technical reports showing network uptime or how much fiber got laid. They must include a moral inventory.
A moral inventory, what does that look like?
It means publicly documenting corrections to previous statements, admitting to failures where they fell short of the covenant's promises, and analyzing why they fell short. This runs right alongside the technical performance metrics. It sets a really high continuous standard for public honesty. #####2. Clarity of roles and accountability. Step 1.
Okay, so the moral foundation is set with step 0. Now we move to step 1, structure. The sources make a very practical point here that good intentions, good stewardship without clear roles just turns into confusion and chaos. And this is where they bring in a familiar tool from the business world, the RCI framework.
Yes, exactly. RACI standing for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. It's a way to clarify who does what in a huge, complex project like this, making sure everyone understands their specific duty within the overall structure of government. The key role we need to focus on first is accountable. This is the entity that ultimately owns the decision-making and the final outcome for the entire national strategy.
Right, so who holds that ultimate accountability for the whole digital rebuild plan, setting the technical standards, deciding the sequence of work?
According to these documents, the full weight of accountability rests squarely on the Digital Policy Ministry. They own the overarching strategy. They're the single point where the buck stops for the success or failure of the entire thing.
Being accountable means they set the rules, they manage the overall architectural blueprint, and they have to ensure all the other ministries involved are meeting both the moral standards of the covenant and the technical requirements.
That's it. Now, the other rules support this. Who is designated as responsible?
The responsible party, the one doing the day-to-day coordinating work across different government departments, is a cabinet-level steering committee. They execute the plan.
Makes sense. And consulted. That seems clear.
That's Parliament. They need to be consulted for approving the necessary laws and, of course, the budget. Steps 3 and 4 really depend on them.
Okay, and the last one, informed. Who needs to be kept informed, and why is that important for transparency?
This is crucial. The Supreme Audit Institution, the government's main financial watchdog, and key civil society transparency groups must be kept informed.
And how does keeping them informed, say through open data dashboards, actually uphold that Ninth Commandment principle of truthfulness we talked about?
Well, it creates a kind of external check, doesn't it? By giving these independent groups access to open, machine-readable data on contracts, payments, network performance, and so on. It means the government's official statements can be instantly checked against the raw data. If the government tries to spin something or hide problems, the audit office and these civil society groups have the evidence to call them out. It forces alignment between public statements and reality.
Right, it builds in accountability from the outside.
Mhm.
Now, the sources are very clear about defining the state's role and powers here, drawing on Romans 13, but they seem just as clear about defining the limits specifically concerning the church.
Yes, if the state's job involves wielding the sword, ensuring public order and justice, what's the specific role assigned to the church during this whole national reconstruction?
The sources insist the church must stay strictly within its God-given spiritual aim. Its authority and activity are defined by the Westminster Confession, chapters 21 and 31. That means its core commission is focused on word, sacrament, and church discipline. The authors are very careful here. They explicitly forbid the church from usurping the sword, meaning taking on civil governing powers.
And it also says the church must avoid becoming entangled in state administration. Why is that separation so critical in this context? Getting involved might seem helpful.
The danger they point out is compromise. If the church becomes financially dependent on the state, say, by taking government grants to run social programs or gets drawn into administering state functions, it risks losing its prophetic voice. Its ability to speak truth to power, to call the civil magistrate back to integrity, could be muted if it's seen as just another government partner or contractor.
So the church's role isn't to be another NGO providing services funded by the state.
No, its unique contribution is spiritual. It acts as that prophetic conscience. It shepherds people, provides ethical teaching, maybe digital ethics, catechesis in this context, coordinates mercy ministry during crises like power outages, but always as the church, distinct from the state. ###3. Governance that restrains evil. Step 2.
All right, moving from roles to the actual mechanics of governing. Step 2 is about the magistrate, the government, acting as God's servant, as Romans 13 puts it. The goal here, as the sources describe it, is to set up the rules of public life so that structurally, honesty is actually cheaper than a fraud. It's about using God's moral law as practical guardrails for handling public money and public speech.
Exactly. It's about engineering the system to make corruption harder and integrity easier. We see this applied first with the Eighth Commandment, you shall not steal. How do they use that to restrain theft in the context of a massive infrastructure project?
They target things like cronyism, wasteful spending, and also, interestingly, theft through technology providers locking the government into expensive proprietary systems.
And how does that translate into specific requirements for government procurement? How do they make spending transparent?
The mandate is for radical transparency. They require a single, open e-procurement platform, not multiple systems hidden away in different ministries. One central platform. And this platform has to show everything. The initial tenders who bid, the contracts awarded, any changes made, milestones reached, and critically, all the payments made. And all this data must be in open, machine-readable formats so anyone can analyze it.
That sounds like it would make it very hard to hide inflated contracts or payments for work that never happened. What about shell companies? How do they prevent corruption hiding behind anonymous corporate structures?
Good question. The sources tackle that directly. They mandate compulsory beneficial ownership disclosures.
So if some shell company bids for a contract, they have to publicly declare who the actual human beings are that ultimately own or control that company.
Precisely. No hiding behind layers of corporate anonymity. This helps prevent politicians or their families from secretly benefiting from contracts and make sure conflict of interest rules can actually be enforced.
Okay, that's theft via contracts. The sources also mention applying the Eighth Commandment principle of just weights and measures. How does that apply to building a network?
They apply it to the physical process of laying cables, specifically concerning rights of way. That's the legal permission needed to run fiber or other infrastructure across land.
Ah, yes. That could be a huge source of corruption historically, right? Local officials demanding arbitrary fees or bribes just to let crews dig. Little petty toll booths, as the source calls them.
Exactly. So the sources mandate standardizing these rights-of-way fees and processes through national law, making the cost of access fair, predictable, and uniform across the country, removing the opportunity for local officials to extort builders. It ensures an honest cost for construction.
Makes sense. So that's governing money, honestly. How does the Ninth Commandment, the requirement for truthfulness, shape how the state is allowed to communicate?
The governance structure requires the government itself to adopt and follow a truth and transparency charter. And this isn't just about avoiding outright lies.
It goes further.
Yes. It explicitly prohibits the government from using its communication channels for manipulative propaganda. It forbids trying to distort public understanding or conduct psychological operations against its own citizens. State communication must aim to inform, not manipulate.
That's a high bar. What happens if the government makes a genuine mistake in an official statement? How does the charter handle corrections?
It mandates honesty and correction, too. Any corrections must be posted just as visibly as the original error. So if a misleading statement was on the main government website's front page, the correction has to go on the front page, too, with similar prominence. Trust is earned through demonstrated humility, not demanded.
That's quite something. Finally, Step 2 touches on protecting civil liberties, drawing on the Westminster Confession's chapter on liberty of conscience. How does this translate into practical safeguards against government overreach, particularly surveillance?
It bakes due process right into the security architecture. Any government surveillance or interception of communications requires checks and balances. So first, it requires judicial warrants. Only a judge can authorize surveillance, not the executive branch acting alone.
And technically, how is it constrained?
Enforcement demands strict minimization. That means only collecting the absolute minimum data necessary to fulfill the specific warrant. No dragnet collection. And the system itself must maintain immutable audit trails. Immutable audit trails. What exactly does that prevent?
It prevents government agents from covering their tracks if they abuse their power. An immutable log means every single action taken on the system, every login, every query, every access by an agent is recorded, timestamped, and cannot be altered or deleted after the fact.
So the system itself testifies against misuse.
Correct. It holds agents accountable. And crucially, the governance explicitly prohibits secret memoranda that function as law. No hidden directives or backroom rules can be created to bypass the publicly established laws protecting civil liberties. Everything has to be out in the open under law. Okay, so we've got the moral reset and the governance structure.
Hmm.
Step 3 is where these principles get locked into actual law. The idea is you need a solid legal framework that actively protects good conduct and restrains the bad. The sources identify 4 key pieces of legislation, 4 pillars, they call them, that need to be put in place together, complementing each other.
Right, let's walk through them. Pillar 1 is the Foundational Telecommunications Act. What core aspects of stewardship does this law nail down?
This one deals with the physical infrastructure and the market structure. It clarifies how the state manages scarce public resources, like radio spectrum. It sets fair rules for interconnection between different network operators. It also formally standardizes those rights of way we discussed. And importantly, it defines where open access duties might apply situations where network owners have to let competitors use their infrastructure under fair terms. Basically, it ensures the market operates with just weights and measures.
Got it. Pillar 2, the Cybersecurity Act. This sounds more defensive.
It is. This law focuses on protecting the whole system from threats, both external, like hackers, and internal, like insider threats. It defines which services are essential for the nation, think banking, energy, water, emergency comms. And it mandates specific risk management practices for the infrastructure supporting those services. A key requirement is that all operators must implement zero-trust architectures.
Zero trust. That means you don't automatically trust anyone or anything on the network, right? Even internal users or devices.
Exactly. Every access request has to be verified. The law also makes it mandatory for companies in critical sectors to report significant cyber incidents to the National Cybersecurity Agency. No hiding breaches.
Okay, Pillar 3 moves from protecting systems to protecting people. The Data Protection and Digital Identity Act. Why is data protection framed as a moral issue in these sources?
Because unnecessarily collecting or holding on to someone's personal data is seen as a form of theft. It's stealing their autonomy, potentially their reputation, and exposing them to unnecessary risk. So this act applies the Eighth and Ninth Commandments. It mandates principles like data minimization. Only collect the data you absolutely need for a specific stated purpose.
So no more collect everything just in case.
Definitely not.
Ugh.
It also requires clear purpose limitation. Use the data only for the reason you collected it, plus define retention schedules so data isn't kept forever. And mandatory notification if there's a data breach.
What about digital identity systems, biometrics, national ID databases?
Those have strict controls. Any state digital ID system must be strictly opt-in, not mandatory. Its use must be limited to specific, narrow purposes defined in law, and accessing the data must meet the same warrant standards as other surveillance. The goal is to prevent it becoming a tool for general tracking.
Right, avoiding the creation of massive, risky data honeypots. And the final pillar, the Emergency Communications and Lawful Access Act. Sounds like it covers 2 sides of the coin.
It does. On one side, it ensures the country has a robust system for public alerts during emergencies, using multiple channels like cell broadcasts, apps, sirens, so warnings get through. On the other side, this act defines the only legal way the state can conduct surveillance. It reiterates that access must be narrowly targeted, approved only by courts via warrants, and technically minimized.
And it reinforces that point about no secret laws.
Absolutely. It explicitly forbids any secret rules or directives that function as law in this area. All powers and procedures must be based on publicly accessible legislation passed by Parliament. This protects liberty of conscience against arbitrary administrative decisions.
Now, the sources specifically state that these laws must contain explicit conscience protections. What does that look like in practice, legally?
It's about reinforcing those spiritual boundaries we talked about earlier. The laws need clauses that specifically protect churches and other religious organizations from undue state interference. This means safeguarding their internal communications, their membership records, their right to internal discipline from mandatory government disclosure or state entanglement. It legally reinforces the separation of the church's spiritual government from the state's civil government, consistent with WCF 21 and 31, #5. Architectural principles serving truth and neighbor love. Step 4. All right, the moral groundwork is laid, the laws are in place. Step 4 is where the rubber meets the road, or maybe where the light meets the fiber optic cable. This step outlines 5 core architectural principles. These are the concrete engineering decisions that turn all that theological and legal prudence into actual functioning, durable systems. This is theology shaping engineering.
Let's break them down. Principle 1 sounds foundational. Fiber first with domestic interconnection. Why fiber first?
Fiber first is about investing for the long haul. Fiber optic cables offer the most capacity, the longest lifespan, and the lowest latency compared to other technologies. It's a commitment to long-term stewardship. But just laying fiber isn't enough. For resilience, the core network, the main trunks, must be built using redundant rings and meshes. This means major hubs need dual-homed paths, basically, at least two physically separate routes connecting them to the rest of the network.
So if one cable gets cut, traffic automatically reroutes. No single point of failure.
That's the goal. It prevents both accidents and deliberate attacks from taking down large sections of the network. Now, the second part is domestic interconnection. What does that require architecturally?
It requires setting up neutral, carrier-agnostic Internet Exchange Points, or IXPs. These are physical locations where different network operators, mobile companies, broadband providers, even big content companies can connect their networks directly and exchange traffic efficiently.
And the state plays a role here, too.
Yes, state services and government networks are required to connect and exchange traffic at these domestic IXPs. The goal is to keep internet traffic that starts and ends within the country inside the country.
So it reduces reliance on international links, lowers latency for domestic users, and enhances national data sovereignty.
Exactly. It makes the national network more robust and independent. And part of this principle also involves hardening the actual internet routing system.
How so? What does that involve technically?
It means deploying technologies like RPKI and DNS-SEC becomes standard operating procedure. RPKI, that's Resource Public Key Infrastructure, provides cryptographic proof that a network operator actually owns the IP addresses they're announcing. It prevents bad actors from maliciously hijacking traffic.
Okay, so it makes routing more honest. And DNSAC.
That secures the domain name system, the Internet's phone book. It ensures that when you type a website address, you're actually sent to the legitimate server, not redirected to a fake one. These are technical ways of enforcing the Ninth Commandment, making the network tell the truth about where data is flowing. Got it. Principle 2. Resilient last mile as a portfolio. This seems to be about connecting actual homes and businesses.
Right, and it recognizes that one size doesn't fit all. The last mile, the final connection to the user, needs a mix of technologies. You'll use high-capacity fiber to the home, or FTTH, in densely populated areas where it's economical. But in rural or harder-to-reach areas, you'll use other tools like licensed fixed wireless access, FWA, or technologies that use lower frequency bands which travel further.
So it's about practical stewardship and ensuring everyone gets connected, not just those in profitable areas. That sounds like neighbor love in practice.
That's exactly the framing. And this mixed portfolio also has to handle traffic fairly, meaning while the network must support quality of service, or QoS, to prioritize essential things like emergency calls or critical government communications, it must also maintain principled net neutrality for regular internet traffic from homes and businesses.
So no creating internet fast lanes where big companies can pay to get preferential treatment and potentially disadvantage smaller competitors.
Correct. It aims for a level playing field, a just market for communication.
Principle 3 has an interesting framing. Satellites and radios as shock absorbers, not idols. What's the theological caution there?
It acknowledges that satellite links, LEO, MEO, GEO, and robust radio systems are valuable, especially for redundancy in reaching very remote areas,
Yeah.
or during disasters when terrestrial networks might fail. However, they must be integrated carefully as policy-governed, pre-contracted failover options. They're seen as a crucial safety net, a way to diversify paths, but not as a replacement for building robust, domestically controlled terrestrial infrastructure like fiber.
Why not just rely heavily on satellites? Seems easier sometimes.
The sources argue that over-reliance on satellites externalizes critical national infrastructure, potentially making the nation dependent on foreign providers or systems less under its control. It can also sidestep the hard work of long-term terrestrial stewardship. They're a backup, a supplement, not the primary solution.
Okay. Principle 4 brings physical reality into focus. Power and site resilience is co-equal design. This links back to the Sixth Commandment, protecting life.
Directly, if the communication network goes down during a disaster because the power failed, lives are put at risk. So ensuring the network sites have reliable power isn't an add-on, it's a core design requirement, just as important as the network gear itself.
What does that look like practically?
It means things like implementing microgrids at critical locations like core network hubs and ISPs, allowing them to run independently if the main power grid fails. It requires installing appropriately sized batteries and generators with rigorously maintained fuel supplies and testing schedules. And the law steps in too.
Yes, the law must mandate priority power restoration for critical communications infrastructure after an outage. IXPS, emergency call centers, PSAPs, and the links serving hospitals must be among the very first things to get power back. Makes sense. The final principle, number 5, seems to address corruption again.
Right.
Open standards, interoperability, and automatable operations.
This is about keeping technology as a servant, making sure it doesn't become a master through complexity or vendor lock-in. It mandates using open standards wherever possible and requiring multi-vendor interoperability.
So the government isn't trapped relying on a single expensive vendor for essential systems.
Precisely. If only one company's equipment works, or if their systems use closed, proprietary protocols, that vendor effectively holds the nation hostage. That's seen as a form of theft by lock-in, violating the Eighth Commandment. Open APIs and standards promote competition and honest pricing.
And the automatable operations part, how does that connect to the Ninth Commandment, to truthfulness?
Systems need to be designed with built-in instrumentation, detailed logs, performance telemetry, network traces that allow for truthful postmortems after something goes wrong. If there's a major outage or a security incident, the technology should automatically provide the data needed to figure out exactly what happened, honestly and accurately. Automation helps remove human bias or error in recording what occurred. It engineers the network to, in a sense, tell the truth about itself. Okay, so we have the principles, the laws, the governance. Step 5 is about how you actually build this thing. The sources propose a very deliberate phased approach, not a mad dash. It's structured into 3 distinct phases, and crucially, there are mandatory gates between each phase. You can't move to the next phase until you've demonstrably met the criteria for the current one. This enforces discipline and prevents building on shaky foundations.
Right, let's look at phase 1, the relief phase. This sounds like the immediate aftermath of whatever crisis necessitated this rebuild. How long does it last, and what's the absolute priority?
It's short, 0 to 6 months. And the laser focus is on life and truthful communication. Purely pragmatic, immediate needs. Actions include things like making sure routes are safe for construction crews, demining might be necessary, rapidly assessing the damage across the country, and quickly restoring basic communication backhaul links to the most critical sites, hospitals, power plants, emergency operation centers.
And this might involve temporary solutions.
Yes, using whatever works quickly and prudently, maybe those pre-contracted satellite links or microwave connections we talked about. But even in this emergency phase, any procurement, even rapid procurement, has to go through that new transparent e-procurement platform to prevent opportunistic corruption during the chaos.
And what's the checkpoint? What defines passing Gate A and being able to move on?
Gate A requires solid proof documented evidence that 100% of the country's regions can now originate and receive basic emergency alerts. And that, say, 95% of the highest priority sites, hospitals, etc., have reliable connectivity, maybe measured as 95% uptime, ideally with redundant paths established. It proves basic life safety functions are restored.
Okay, once Gate A is passed, we enter the recovery phase. This lasts longer, maybe 6 to 24 months. What's the focus here? Establishing the resilient bones of the network.
Exactly. This is where the permanent, robust infrastructure starts going in. Rebuilding the major fiber optic trunks, but this time using those resilient mesh designs. Formally enacting the laws to standardize rights-of-way access. Fully establishing and operationalizing those neutral IXPs for domestic traffic exchange. And at the same time, the basic cybersecurity posture needs to be implemented across the board. That means rolling out mandatory zero-trust identity systems for government and critical infrastructure, and also tackling supply chain security.
How do they secure the supply chain?
A key requirement is demanding software bills of materials, or SBOMs, from vendors. This is like an ingredients list for software showing all the components used. It helps identify potential vulnerabilities hidden in third-party code.
Right, and what are the key metrics for passing Gate Bs showing the bones are strong?
Gate B needs to show significant progress in both market structure and physical build. For example, a metric might be that 80% of households in major urban areas can now choose between at least 2 different providers offering high-speed service using independent infrastructure, like fiber from one company and fixed wireless from another.
So that demonstrates real competition and resilience at the consumer level.
Yes, and another metric would be demonstrating that a significant percentage of the nation's internal internet traffic is now actually flowing through the new domestic IXPs, proving they're working as intended.
Then comes the final stage, the development phase, lasting perhaps 2 to 5 years. The focus shifts here.
It shifts towards broader access, long-term sustainability, and also the human element, social formation. This phase tackles getting connectivity out to everyone, including rural and remote areas, often using competitively awarded performance-based grants to incentivize providers. And critically, affordability becomes a major focus. The sources frame affordable access not just as an economic goal, but as a moral requirement of neighbor love. The network isn't truly successful if ordinary people can't afford to use it. Maturing power resilience with microgrids also happens here.
And Gate C, the final gate, what does success look like at the end of this phase?
Gate C measures the overall fruit of the entire effort, and it's as much about quality as quantity. Yes, there will be targets for high population coverage, say 95% connected in urban areas, 80% rural. But perhaps the most important measure, according to the sources, is documented evidence of rising public trust. Trust in government communications, trust in the fairness of the system. That demonstrates whether the Truth and Transparency Covenant actually took root. #7. Safety, security, and due process. Now, circling back to safety systems, that link to the Sixth Commandment, protecting life, means the design and operation of emergency alert systems are a core governance responsibility. The sources are clear on who is accountable.
Right. So who owns the outcome for the system that needs to work flawlessly when lives are on the line?
The National Emergency Management Service, or agency, is designated as accountable. They own the system's overall design, testing, and operational readiness. However, the actual delivery of alerts to citizens often relies on others. So the mobile network operators and public broadcasters are designated as responsible for that last-mile delivery. They have to ensure their towers, transmitters, and systems reliably push those alerts out when activated.
And the alerts themselves need to reach everyone, right? Accessibility is key.
Absolutely. The system can't rely on just one method. It must use a multi-channel stack. That means using technologies like cell broadcast, which can reach all phones in an area even if the network is congested, alongside dedicated mobile apps, and integrating with traditional methods like public sirens where appropriate. And crucially, the design process must involve consultation with local emergency responders, representatives from disability advocacy groups, and groups representing linguistic minorities to make sure the alerts are understandable and accessible to the entire population. Everyone bears the image of God. Everyone needs protecting.
Okay, that covers emergency alerts. What about the day-to-day security of the network itself? How does the Ninth Commandment truthfulness get applied to security operations to ensure the system is honest about its own state?
It requires building security in, from the start, zero trust by design, as we mentioned. That means rigorous identity checks for every user and device, applying the principle of least privilege access, and segmenting the network so a breach in one area doesn't compromise the whole thing. It also means securing the supply chain, using those SBOMs, and requiring digitally signed firmware for critical equipment so you can verify the components are authentic and haven't been tampered with. It's about ensuring the system components are what they claim to be.
And the sources talk about requiring truthful forensics. That sounds demanding.
It is. It's maybe the ultimate test of whether the system operates honestly. Network and security logs must be detailed. They must be accurately time-synchronized across the entire infrastructure. And again, they must be immutable, impossible to tamper with after the fact. Why is immutability so vital here?
Because it allows for honest, factual, post-mortem analysis after any security incident or major failure. If logs can be altered, you can never be sure you understand what really happened. An immutable log ensures the system provides a truthful record of events, which is essential for learning from mistakes and holding people accountable. It aligns with the Ninth Commandment's demand for truth. Public reports on incidents must also be precise and honest. And finally, let's revisit due process for surveillance one more time. How does the technical architecture itself enforce the legal limits set by the courts?
Beyond requiring court warrants, the technology used for lawful access must be designed for minimization. The system should only allow investigators to access the specific data authorized by the warrant, nothing more. Access must be court-supervised, and every single action taken by an investigator using these tools must be recorded in those immutable audit logs. This creates accountability. And the sources are emphatic. Protecting citizens' ability to use strong, lawful cryptography is paramount. There can be no mandated government backdoors built into encryption standards or network equipment.
Why no backdoors? Wouldn't that help catch criminals?
The argument is that any backdoor created for the government inevitably creates a vulnerability that criminals or foreign adversaries can also exploit. It fundamentally compromises the security and integrity of the entire system for everyone. Protecting privacy and security for law-abiding citizens is the priority. #8, human capital and vocation. Step 9.
So much of this depends not just on laws and tech, but on the people who actually design, build, and maintain these systems. The sources seem to recognize this, talking about cultivating skilled workers, artisans, almost whose character and craft are developed together.
Yes, there's a real emphasis on moving beyond seeing workers as just human resources and instead understanding their work as a vocation, a calling pursued under God's providence. This has direct implications for how work is structured.
How so? How does this theological view shape HR policy?
It leads to what the sources call Sabbath-wise HR norms. It means building policies that respect human limits and the need for rest, recognizing that people aren't machines.
What kind of specific protections are mandated to prevent burnout, which is so common in tech fields?
Things like implementing mandatory staff rotations for high-stress roles to distribute the load, setting firm maximum limits on how often someone can be on call. The example given is maybe no more than 2 weeks out of every 4. And critically, guaranteeing mandatory rest. That means protected weekly time off, but also required downtime after someone has managed a major high-stress incident. The reasoning is clear. Exhausted, burned-out engineers make mistakes, leading to fragile, insecure systems. Protecting worker health is tied to the Sixth Commandment, preserving life and well-being.
And it's not just about rest, but also about integrity in the work itself. How is that taught?
Technical training isn't just technical. It includes specific modules on applying the Eighth and Ninth Commandments directly to engineering tasks. Staff are explicitly taught to reject theft by corner cutting, like using cheaper, substandard materials on a government contract to boost profits. They're also taught to reject false witness in their work, meaning being truthful in trouble tickets, system logs, and post-incident reports. Integrity is demanded as part of the craft.
That's a high standard for daily work. The final point in this section addresses a common problem in post-conflict or developing nations: brain drain. How do the sources propose bringing back skilled engineers and technicians who may have left?
They outline a very structured program called the Diaspora Talent Bridge. It's designed to make it easier for skilled nationals living abroad to contribute to the rebuild, offering 4 distinct pathways.
What are the 4 tracks?
There's Return, which offers practical support like financial aid and fast-track professional credential recognition for those willing to move back permanently. Then Rotate, setting up short-term fellowships, maybe 3 to 6 months, for experienced engineers abroad to come back temporarily and mentor local teams. Third is Remote, creating formal channels for skilled diaspora members to contribute part-time, perhaps teaching online courses or providing remote consulting. And fourth is Invest, encouraging those abroad to support the rebuild financially through things like specialized investment funds or by donating certified needed equipment.
And the underlying message to those returning or contributing?
It's carefully framed. The call is for them to come back, not as saviors, placing trust in their own skills or foreign experience, but as servants, to contribute their God-given talents within the established moral framework of stewardship, transparency, and neighbor love that governs the whole project.
As we wrap up this deep dive, it's clear that this entire strategy, from the highest theological concepts down to specifying cable standards, is held together by a series of clear moral contrasts, what the sources implicitly frame as antitheses. These are the non-negotiable dividing lines.
That's a good way to summarize it. Let's quickly recap some of those key contrasts that run through the whole plan. First, there's the fundamental posture towards technology itself. It's a rejection of technocratic idolatry, the belief that technology itself can save us in favor of what they call stewardly sobriety. Technology is a tool, always under moral governance, never an end in itself.
Right. Then there's the political boundary for the state, rejecting state absolutism, the idea the state has unlimited power in favor of ordered liberty. This means the state must operate strictly under public law, requiring things like judicial warrants, due process, and those immutable audit trails we discussed. The magistrate has limits.
Third, regarding how the state communicates with its people, rejecting propaganda and manipulation in favor of truthful communication. That's enforced practically by that requirement to post corrections just as visibly as errors, demanding institutional honesty.
Fourth, governing the marketplace. Rejecting crony capitalism, things like vendor lock-in, hidden deals, those petty toll booths for rights of way in favor of just markets. This is achieved through open standards, transparent e-procurement, and fair performance-based funding.
And finally, that crucial boundary for the church. Rejecting the idea of the church as just another service vendor competing for state funds in favor of the church as church, maintaining its unique spiritual commission word, sacrament, discipline, so it can fulfill its role as a prophetic conscience without getting entangled with or usurping the state's authority.
These sources lay out a really compelling integrated vision. They argue very strongly that the success of this entire massive infrastructure project hinges on the long-term health of that initial moral reset, that step zero. The biggest challenge down the road, they suggest, won't be replacing aging hardware or upgrading software. It will be whether the nation, its leaders, and its institutions continue to genuinely adhere to that truth and transparency covenant and keep up with that demanding practice of the quarterly moral inventory long after the fiber is lit and the networks are humming.
That's the core challenge. Because the ultimate measure of success, according to this framework, isn't really about achieving 100% broadband coverage or gigabit speeds. It's about whether public trust in official communication is actually restored and maintained. If the systems are built to be honest, and if leaders publicly confess failures and correct course, then the network carries more than just data packets. It carries public confidence, demonstrating genuine neighbor love in practice.
A demanding standard and certainly a challenging final thought for you to consider from this deep dive. Thanks for joining us on Reform Thinking.